All right, well, it's 10 o'clock. We'll get started. We may have a few people join as we start. This is Tim McCoy. I'll be our meeting moderator. Welcome you to our district Zoom meeting with the Northeast District staff and others that may have joined. We've got a lot of people that have jumped on different Zoom calls just because they met their schedule better. Before we start, we provide a few reminders. The first one is to mute your audio when you're not talking. Sometimes that'll get feedback, and that will help us have pretty good sound as we go through this. The general format we'll be following is we'll start with the message from the director. Then we'll go through and answer some of the frequently asked questions we've been getting, especially regarding the COVID-19 emergency and a lot of questions about our offices and reopening and opening activities in the state. And then we'll provide plenty of time for answers to live questions. There's 3 different ways you can do that. If you're really proficient in Zoom, there is a raise your hand function you can use as a participant. I'll be scrolling for that. You can also ask a question or just let me know that you want to ask a question through the chat box. And then I'll just call on you and you can open up your sound and ask your question directly. And then if you're joining by phone, I know that's a little more challenging, but you can text a question to 402-429-866. Those are going to Christy Firestone, and she'll send those to me through chat, and then I'll call on you so you can ask your question directly. We want to make sure we hear from people and get your questions asked. We have scheduled an hour for this meeting, and we know your time's valuable and appreciate all of you taking the time to participate in this meeting. We hope you find it valuable. So we are recording all of the Zoom meetings, and our plan is to provide a link to them on the agency web or staff page for later viewing. Either if there's something you want to go back and see, or we may have a few staff that weren't able to join any of these. With that, I will turn it over to Director Douglas to start us off.
Thanks, Tim. And it's good to see everybody. It's one of the things that I think that we miss a lot in the current situation is being able to be close to, physically close to the people that we usually collaborate with and visit with and so on. So it's nice just to see your faces. And I do want to reiterate what Tim said. Thanks very much for taking time today. It's Friday, and it feels a little bit like a Friday. I say that because it seems like most of my days seem like the day right ahead of it and the one that's coming up. Get up, do emails, do text, answer emails, send emails, schedule Zoom meetings, have Zoom meetings, collaborate, plan. And we've been doing a lot of planning. Most of us, well, I would say, most of us for sure, haven't lived through anything that's like this before. Not something that altered our behavior, not only at work, but in our personal lives and in our interactions with other people. So it's all new. But we have some advantages as an agency. We've always been innovative. We've always been adaptive, at least in recent times. And we've adapted to situations as they come up. This is, of course, testing our adaptability, our resilience, and our innovation. But we're doing a good job. All of you are doing a good job. We have really skipped very few, if any, beats in serving the public. There's ways that we would like to serve them even more in a lot of our interactive programming and so on that we can't do right now. But we've done a good job of continuing to serve the public, and you're all to be praised for that, and I want to thank you for that. What's been really difficult is planning for the near future and the future that's farther out, because we have to adapt to the events as they occur. And what's our scheduling on things is not directed by us as much as it is by conditions and events. So, what's the current condition of the COVID transmission in your region, in your state, and so on and so forth, in your locality? That's changing, right? And we're all hoping that it keeps changing for the better, but predicting dates is very difficult. But we still have to plan for phased reopening of more people at offices, more public service actually at our sites, and so on. So there's a lot of things that we've done in administration and with the administrative leaders of your division to plan. When we first had COVID known to the extent that we knew we needed to start changing our behaviors and our activities and our offerings and so on, we did a COVID response plan. And the first thing that did was primarily talk about, well, let's not, we can't have large groups of employees together, so let's take some actions that let more people work from home, for example. Since that time, we've expanded that greatly into what we call a continuity of operations plan. And it's very extensive, and it would serve us well, not only in the current situation, but also in any future emergencies like huge floods that are more expansive than even they were last year, or weather events or terrorist events and so on. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. Also, more recently, of course, we've created a phased reopening of activities at state parks, and that is a phased plan. And not all the phases have date certains associated with them at this point in time, because we can't predict very much more than 30 to 45 days in advance of what situation we think we're going to be in. Also, we have to act within and in good concert and with the other health directives that are out there. That means that we keep in close contact with the governor's office and in close contact with all the regional health directors. And there's 3 especially that we've talked to in the state. So, today's Zoom meeting, we'll be talking probably more about a lot of questions associated with our response to COVID. But I want you to know that we want to hear you on any topic that you want to talk about, whether it's directly related to COVID or not. And it's one of the things that we always tell all of our people in orientation and our new employees is we want you to be heard. So we want you to be heard if you have a better idea, if you have a question, if you have a concern, or any kind of contribution that you'd like to make to today's meeting. Know that we'll probably be using this venue for other meetings as time moves forward and for communication. I think it's a pretty good venue for some kinds of communication in the future, even when we're under less stressful conditions. So with that, I invite any and all of you to participate today, and I'll turn it back over to Tim.
All right. Thanks, Jim. We'll start out with some of the frequently asked questions that we've had submitted. A lot of these were very similar. First question, is there a tentative date for when we will either can return or we might require people to come to the office?
We don't have a date certain at this point in time. I might start out also by saying, we have people still working out of offices in various places. And we, the Lincoln office, for example, it's greatly reduced number of people. Some of them rotate in and out. Some work from home most of the time, but at the office part of the time. So we have a lot of different situations. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, some of these dates depend on events. And in the case of having more people into office spaces, it depends on being prepared for that. And so, for example, we probably talk about it a little bit more later, but that means having protocols for having more people in proximity to each other, having building alterations that make sense for the situation. and so on. So conditions, being prepared and having those conditions in place, once that is a little bit more completed, then we'll be able to think more about dates.
Next question. Have there been discussions of when we do start having more people return to the office, if we will do it incrementally with only a percentage of staff returning?
It will be incrementally, and partly that depends on when we're doing things, because the guidelines, if you will, for how many people should be in a space, will change over time. Through the month of May, that's no more than 10 people. That will likely change in the future. But social distancing requirements will not change throughout the whole summer. So there's a combination of social distancing applications that we need to accommodate, and also group size.
As we look at having more people working in the office, will the agency be open to some employees working from home for various reasons?
Yes. One thing that we've discovered in having a lot of people work from home that hadn't before is that there's actually a fair amount of functions that can happen efficiently by people working from home, probably in more cases than we had thought about before. And again, in some cases, maybe working from home part of the time and coming to the office part of the time. So the answer to that is yes. And a lot of those will be on a case-by-case basis.
This one sort of builds on that last question. Would the agency consider reasons of reduction of building use and utilities and more work output for them employees that are happier employees that want to work from home?
Well, the well-being of the employee, from a health safety standpoint is paramount, but also paramount is, the well-being of employees from their ability to feel satisfied in their work, feel productive in their work, and so on. And so if working from home, creates a happier employee, and it's still a highly functioning situation as determined by the employee, their supervisor, and HR, then I would think that would be, the employees' well-being as it might be applied to what he's called happiness would be part of the equation. A lot more of the equation than any kind of reduction in utility bills or something. That would be a lot farther down the list on our consideration.
Started to talk a little bit about this. What will be some of the changes that we may see in the offices as people return to work?
Well, so if you think about it in terms of the parameters we need to work within, which is social distancing, for example, and you have to also think about it in sort of two kinds of phases. There's the phase where we're just talking about looking out for the well-being of our employees, and that requires certain kinds of alterations in protocols and actual physical alterations of offices. But then there's another phase where we're allowing the public to come back in and interact with our employees, and that a different kind of social distancing protocols and a different kind of alterations of offices. So in that vein, also we have the questions of personal protective equipment in the early stages, for sure, of returning more people back to work. So we're working on a returning to work plan that considers all of those things.
Would Game and Parks consider taking people's temperatures as they enter the buildings for both staff or the public?
Well, we've talked about that. They actually make a remote temperature sensing apparatus that you just walk by. But there's probably a lot of considerations about personal liberties. Also, you know, who's gonna calibrate that machine and recalibrate it? You know, I mean, right now it's not high on our list of ways to be protective of our employees. We'd have to do a lot more consultation with health professionals to decide that was what we had to do.
Will we require the public to wear masks when they enter the building?
All of it, you know, in our planning and our draft planning that we're doing right now, as it applies to any additional employees working in the workspaces that other than those that are working there right now, as we ramp that up, so to speak, and especially as we get to a phase where we were allowing the public to come in. If it's any time in the foreseeable future, we would require masks, yes.
Is there a plan to continue social distancing once we return to our office spaces?
Yes, you know, we, as I mentioned earlier, you know, we work within parameters and in consultation with others in state government and others in the health field. So for example, our governor has said repeatedly that there'll need to be some forms of social distancing throughout the whole summer and into the early fall. So that's one of the overriding parameters that we'll work within, sideboards that we work within as we make decisions. So that means in some cases, some alterations of our environment in the workspace.
Once everyone can return to the office, will there still be in-state travel restrictions?
Well, when we don't know the exact date of when we're going to return more people to the office yet, then it's hard to know what the situation will be statewide as far as travel restrictions. Right now, for example, the regional health directors advise that they'd like us not to travel unnecessarily outside of the health district that we reside within.
Could the new employee orientation outing still be this year if we use masks and do social distancing?
Perhaps if it's a Winterfest situation.
If the science shows that people are immune once they've had COVID-19, is it possible game and parks would do our own testing policy, even if it's not required by the state, to let people know they are immune and unlikely that they are carrying the virus?
Well, since testing, whether you're testing, you know, currently for positive or negative results for being infected with COVID-19, or whether you would be testing in the future after they perfect antibody testing, which isn't perfected at the present time. Testing is a health measure, right? We wouldn't have a health measure that wasn't done in concert with some other probably state or health directed program. So we wouldn't be doing anything that wasn't in concert with health professionals.
How is the agency planning and preparing for a possible second wave of the pandemic?
Well, you know, we don't know whether there'll be a second wave of the pandemic, but what we do know is that we're learning a lot about the first wave, from the first wave. We're learning a lot about, you know, how we can work remotely, how we can communicate remotely and do some other things remotely. So, and we're learning about, you know, the steps that we need to take and the hoops that we need to jump through if we're going to try to do something by an emergency order of the governor, or whether we need to change regulations in a hurry through emergency meetings and so on and so forth. And we've learned a lot about how to work within the current situation that would apply to any situation that worsened again later on. So how we're preparing is doing a good job right now in collaborating with others, planning well, and protecting our employees and the public. So we'd be in the same kind of a situation then.
So this question is related to the last one, and it's have we had any thoughts or plans about in-person deer check stations for firearm deer season if there was such a second wave?
Well, protecting the well-being health of our employees and the public is, paramount in everything that we're doing and planning for. So we've begun discussions about what steps we would need to take if we decided that, for example, we wanted to telecheck everything. We've also know that we need to communicate at some point with our check station operators. We don't man all the check station places. A lot of those are just a convenience store operator or something. So we're looking at what we would need to do and what time frame we'd need to decide to do it. And of course, there's a lot of difference too between like checking elk, which is almost by appointment only, and a lot more limited situation, and different than a crowded nighttime check situation with 6 pickups all waiting to go.
It's kind of a secondary question on firearm on deer check. Will accommodations would be made for employees who have concerns about their own health or who may have vulnerable family members?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's in everything that we're deciding to do, and whether it's what are the next activities that we're going to try to have happen that are interactive with the public, whether it's more people coming back to work in office spaces, in all those things, the health and well-being of our employees and protecting that is utmost in our mind. So it wouldn't be any different if we were contemplating some limited check station.
As the dry application for big game permits starts here in a little over a month, what's our agency plan, or are we thinking about what we would have to do if there were a need to either cancel seasons in advance or during the season? And that concerns from especially our staff who are thinking they're getting a lot of questions from that about hunters.
Well, I don't think that we have enough information to make an assumption that we'll have to cancel any seasons or reduce participation in those seasons. So I don't think that at this point we're not planning to disallow applications by non-residents, for example, or anyone. What we'll be prepared to do is react quickly if we need to adjust, and that might, if we would need to adjust later on, we may need to refund permit fees or something to that effect and communicate quickly and so on. But we'll be prepared for that, but we're not planning for that because we're not certain that that's going to be necessary.
When will overnight camping be allowed again?
Well, we started in our phase in, with on May 20, people can camp in RVs that are by reservation only, and that was a fairly easy decision to make. The campsites are 25 feet apart. There's no more than 8 people at a campsite. By reservation only, we know who's there. If there's issues later on, we can recontact people that were there, etc. Also, one of the main factors is they're not very dependent upon our infrastructure, and especially our shower houses and modern toilets. So, CDC recommendations are, cleaning some of those facilities that I just mentioned, at least once an hour. When we have a really high volume of use, like at shower houses, you actually have lines lining up to use those shower houses, and the cleaning aspect of that, the personnel required to do that, is something we're just not prepared for right now. So as we get closer to being prepared to maybe do that, or if the necessity to do that eases, we'll be in a better position to say when we can open those up. You know, we are in discussions about, you know, what it might take to allow some tent camping, assuming that they're going to be self-sufficient, or if they're not self-sufficient, they'll need to take that into consideration if they're going to come. So, you know, as I said, we have phases, but we just haven't put dates on all the next phases yet, but we will.
Next question is about cabins. How soon do we think cabins might be open, especially if health directives relax?
Well, the biggest issue on cabins that we're trying to resolve is what will be responsible as it comes to cleaning cabins after occupancy. And hasn't been real easy to determine, because hotels and motels, which are, you know, somewhat equivalent to what we're talking about, are sort of all over the map on what they're doing on their cleaning. And so in trying to look at professional recommendations, there's things that are still unknown about how long virus survives on different kinds of surfaces, especially soft surfaces. We know it can survive up to a week on hard surfaces, but hard surfaces are easier to clean. And so there are some larger hotel chains that are using very expensive misting equipment to clean, and we will look into that. But time may be our biggest ally in trying to make sure that lodging would be healthfully available to the next occupants. In other words, maybe we're only renting a portion of those lodges or cabins at a time, and after they are not occupied, we would let them sit vacant for quite some time, because time helps with that. So there's different options, and as soon as we get those protocols figured out, then we can put dates to it. But we don't have all those protocols figured out. We also have the health and well-being of our housekeeping staff that's integrally involved in that decision. So it's not as easy a decision as one might think.
Next question. We understand that many of our efforts have been focused on looking at our Game and Parks programs and events and allowing those to resume. Has there been any discussion of when outside organization or groups might be able to allow to plan events within our park system?
I actually don't think, to be responsible, that we would probably utilize much different criteria for allowing someone else sponsored event to occur as we would our own. In other words, we still need to be responsible. We still need to look at whether they can socially distance themselves, whether the group size comports with the current standards, health standards, and so on. So now an interesting conversation took place yesterday with Fisheries Division concerning fishing tournaments, because there's some proposals out. We haven't been approving fishing tournament permits, but there's some proposals out there for some fishing tournaments where they've started to take into account all the factors I mentioned, and a lot of their tournament is virtual. Weighing's virtual. A lot of things are virtual. So if it's our own event or some other sponsored event, we look at the same kinds of concerns and considerations. If they can meet the concerns and considerations, then they'll probably be allowed.
All right. I've got a couple of people that are in the queue with questions, and so I'm going to tee those up. Scott Wessel, you're up first.
Okay, have we considered or are we considering modifying our wildfire response plan to account for the challenges that the COVID-19 provides? And if so, I think there's some pretty good guidance from the federal government that they've provided to some of their wildland fire teams with regard to how to socially distance, how to disinfect things, and so on. Is that something that we're considering doing?
I have not had a conversation with Wildlife Division about that, but it certainly seems like something we should be looking at. And so I thank you for bringing that up, and I'll check in with Tim and Alicia and others and make sure that that's on our radar.
Okay, thank you.
And then I have a question from Andrew Fawn in communications. Andrew, are you on?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just wondering if we heard anything more about rehires of temps.
So the state of Nebraska slowed down the process for approval for hiring. There were certain classes of temporary employees in the Parks Division that had already been advertised, and so they allowed those to move at a more rapid pace. Recently, we had some that we submitted for approval that were not approved and said resubmit in May. And we're in the process of resubmitting. So hopefully we can break some of that loose faster in the very near future.
Thank you.
Encourage people, if you've got a question, to you can try to chat me, you can send something to Christy at 402-429-8671, or put your hand up on Zoom. I don't have any other questions right now in the queue. We've got a few other questions that have been asked that we think are good ones as we go through the meeting, so I'll throw a few of those out there. Will Game and Parks provide hand sanitizer and cleaning supplies for staff?
The answer is yes. And so there's one of the avenues for acquiring personal protective equipment is through state government, and we've made some requests for hand sanitizers and masks and gloves and so on that haven't been delivered yet. So today, as a matter of fact, we started reaching out to other private corporations that supply, and we're making a fairly large order today for some personal protective equipment. Law enforcement has had the ability to acquire more of it because they're in the first responder classification. Anyway, the answer to your question is yes, and we're in the process of acquiring large quantities of those items.
Next one is, if staff cannot fully work remotely, will there be the ability to work both in the office as needed and for other times work from home?
Yes. I might mention too, I don't know that I covered this completely when earlier on, but along the line of altering our workspaces to be safer, those of you that are in some sort of office leadership position in a district office or a service center are going to be contacted shortly, if you haven't already, to help us assess the current condition of your office spaces In other words, how many people are usually work there before COVID out of that space? How many are using that spaces right now? You might have to do some measurements. Help us investigate your air conditioning and heating system, because one of the things that we're going to have to look at is, you know, spacing of employees, airflow in office spaces, filtration of airflow. For example, in the Lincoln office, we've discovered we're glad that we discovered recently that our air system in Lincoln is adaptable to essentially HEPA filter rating filtration, and we can control the inflow and outflow really well. Now, there may be some spaces in the building that don't have as good an airflow, so we may look into HEPA air filters that are portable, and that might be something also that in the future of district offices, because airflow is important. And so, and with that also, we're looking at when the public starts to come back in, you know, we might have the circles or lines on the floor for lines that you have to, you know, maintain your distance between, or plexiglass shields on service counters, potentially altering walls and plexiglass dividers in office spaces. There's there's also protocols about how you exchange materials, paper materials, mail, etc. So it's actually, our planning is pretty extensive, and but I think we're going to be well prepared when we start making some changes.
Checking to see if I've got any other questions in the queue here. So just hold on a second, everybody. I do not see any. Jim, I think this was an interesting question, and I think it's a good one. With all the challenges that we're dealing with right now, what keeps you up at night?
My dog. I've got to get my dog on a different feeding schedule, apparently. Anyway, I'm sleeping pretty well at night, but I will say that, you know, what's of highest concern to me is maintaining the safety of all of our employees. And, you know, next to that is maintaining the safety of our public that we serve. But all of you are the most important thing to me. You know, we don't function without dedicated, high-performing employees, and we're lucky to have you in those categories. And I couldn't be prouder of the way that you're performing with all these challenges. You know, we haven't had to go through World War II and the Dust Bowl and some of those things that also totally change people's behavior, both socially, personally, and in the workspace, and economically. So you're bucking up and doing well, and thank you for that.
All right, we have a first. I think I've got the first person that raised their hand to ask a question in one of these Zoom meetings. So Josh Kanowski is going to get some sort of special award. Josh, go ahead.
I know you talked about you're not certain on dates of returning to certain types of work. As far as prescribed fire, you know, how long this carries on, can we trust? I mean, we're fairly socially distanced when we're doing prescribed fire, besides our pre-burn meeting, but we can stay distanced, I guess. And can we trust that our staff would, if we felt that we were exposed or could have been exposed prior to a burn, that we wouldn't participate or leave them up? You know, they can not participate if they don't want to. You know, how long would that carry on? You know, looking into the fall, winter, next spring also.
Well, we're not going to put our employees in a position that they where they're not comfortable participating because of their health concerns. And we have to realize too that, you know, we have a lot of employees that have underlying health concerns, and you know, we don't necessarily need to know what those are, right? I mean, you know, that's a private health matter, and then also we have employees that are aging, and so there's a lot of things that might cause an employee not to feel comfortable, even if we thought we were taking the best precautions in a situation. So I guess this is another good opportunity to tell all of you that if you feel that you're in a situation that's not healthy, no matter what it is, we want to know about that, and we want to try to relieve you of that particular situation. So whether it was prescribed burning or something else that we thought, oh, we think we can do this, if somebody is not comfortable with that, you need to defer to that, and we'll find another way to proceed.
Russ Hamer, you had a question. You there, Russ?
Okay, there I am.
All right.
Okay, Jim, with the employment and food supply challenges that we've had with the COVID-19, has law enforcement seen or do they expect an increase in violations? And are there ways that we can use workforce integration practices to assist law enforcement, particularly as they transverse the reservoirs and everything else that's going on with this COVID stuff this summer?
They've seen it. They've seen an increase in violations to a larger degree than Nebraska and some other states. You know, the question would be answered better by Craig Stover, but I see some of the reports that he talks regularly with other states' counterparts, and they put out reports, and I've seen some of those reports. And in some states, they have seen increases in certain kinds of violations and even fish and game violations. So we've seen increased activity in some arenas, and so if you have increased activity, you naturally have some increase in violations. You know, we have more park permit sales in this spring than we've had for a couple of years, and more fishermen are actually fishing right now, you know, which is a good thing, than they have for 3 years. And so with that, you're going to get some increased violations. But as far as rampant increase in violations, not that I'm aware of. Now, that doesn't mean it might not happen as we continue to ramp up participation in our parks, especially. And in the answer to your second question, I'll pose that question to Craig Stover, and there may be something that we can do better together in that regard. So thanks for that suggestion.
I'm checking the queue again. I don't see any more hands up, and I don't believe I have any other questions right now. Jim, I'll ask one that's another good question that was asked. You know, what are the impacts to agency funds from the COVID-19 emergency? I know that's on a lot of people's minds.
Well, I'll sort of treat that in sort of three different columns, if you will. You know, most all of you have been employed long enough to realize that we have the so-called different colors of money. In other words, we have revenue streams that populate a game cash fund, and those are different than revenue streams that populate a park cash fund, and revenue streams into the habitat cash fund. First off, you know, we're fortunate to be mostly cash funded in the agency. You know, 87% of our operations are cash funded and not generally funded. because we have the opportunity, and in most cases it's an advantage where we essentially generate our own funding through permit sales and camping fees and entry permits, et cetera, along with federal aid and other grants and so on. However, that makes us more like a business. And so in a situation like this, where we have to ramp down a lot of the activities, it does have an impact on our revenue streams. But we've had good cash balances going into this situation. We've had a good cash balance in our park cash, good reasonable cash balance in game cash, and a good cash balance in habitat cash. So that gives you some buffer against decreased revenues. So with that background in mind, first on the game cash side, as I mentioned, we've actually had an increase in permit sales for fishing, and we've had good participation there. But on hunting, we ceased selling non-resident turkey permits early on, and that normally would be a revenue stream of over $1 million. Now, we were likely going to have decreased demand anyway. Some people weren't going to come to out of their state to go anywhere, and we also then ended up giving a lot of refunds to people that had already bought permits. But having said that, when all is said and done, there, I think we're only going to be down in revenue there, maybe $500,000 or $600,000. On the habitat cash side, we lost probably $25,000 in at least in habitat stamp sales to those non-resident turkey hunters. But the habitat cash balance is good. So right now, barring this fall wave that I heard questions about, or surge, if we have a normal fall hunting season, we'll be able to manage through the losses that we incurred in turkey season. On the park cash side, the revenue, the bleeding is greater. We make a lot of dollars from camping, and we've delayed camping for quite a while. We have a large revenue stream from other inside the park activities. It's very uncertain about whether we'll be able to open up swimming pools, or if we do, they might not be economically feasible. You need a certain number of participants at pools to break even before you start making any dollars off of it. The farther you get into the season, the harder it is to find lifeguards, and most of them want to leave early and go back to school if they're able. So that could be a huge dip in revenue on the park side. We have seen actually an increase in park entry permit sales, but not nearly enough to offset these other items. The good news on the park side is that, with the resumption of some camping, we'll make several $100,000 a month. Right now, we're from $1 to $2 million down on the park side, but at the present moment, it's not something that we can't manage through. But we've also hired a lot less temporary employees. Now, we're not necessarily happy about that, but that also decreases operating costs. So the picture is not as clear or as rosy on the park side, but right now it looks like we can manage through on the fish and wildlife side.
I'm checking for questions again. I do not see any questions in the queue. So I guess we'll give you guys just a little more time. I might, Jim, I might hit you up on something that I know we've covered in other ones. In terms of managing the parks cash funds, you want to talk about some of the steps we've been taking with our capital construction projects.
Okay, so we do have some other sources of revenue that go into the park system. And one of the major ones over the last few years is a diversion of sales tax, state sales tax, that people spend when they buy a non-farm UTV or ATV or a boat. For the last few years, we've been able to have that diverted to capital construction projects on parks and wildlife management areas. Now, since it's derived from taxes, it's also been a target when there's been years in the budgetary process in state government. It's been a target if there's any balance in that fund. And it's been swept away from us twice, but both times they extended the number of years that we can collect that. This was legislation we got passed several years ago when we were trying to get more revenue streams for parks. But it's got a sunset clause on it, which is we need to go back to the legislature next year and try to extend that sunset if we can. But it's $4 or $5 million a year. So as we do capital construction projects, we've been spending some money out of that fund, some money out of park cash, some money out of some other funding sources that we have for capital construction and maintenance. And we're going to switch all of our capital construction funding that we can to that tax deferral fund and spend it down. Because if we don't spend it down, I'm afraid that they'll take some of it away from us in the next biennial budget. So we're rearranging which dollars and which color of money we use for which items to try to protect our park cash funding.
All right, I'll do one last sweep. I'm still not seeing any additional questions, but I'll double check. I think with that, we'll probably wrap up our meeting for today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and we hope you found this useful and valuable. Please know we want to thank you for all the work that you do in this uncertain time. It's been a big challenge for all of us, but we have a great group of people here that are doing everything you can to meet our mission and serve the public the best we can through this. And we know it's challenging, and we all get a lot of questions. We will be sharing an evaluation form to get feedback on this meeting, and we want to do that because we do see in the future we will be, hopefully may continue to use this as a way to communicate and want to know what works, what doesn't work, how it could be better. So please fill those out and give us your thoughts on that. And I will also leave you with, there is still the opportunity. If you think of another question that you really want to get an answer to, you can still contact Sherry, and we will get an answer to that. Don't be afraid to reach out to your supervisors with those sorts of questions, because we know this is a challenging time, and we want to know about your challenges. We want to know how we can help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.